everyone, this is Ace, and I'm out here to remind you that we at Game Over always strive to give you a hell of an eye-opening experience. So please remember to subscribe, like, share, and hit that bell notification icon so that you're alerted every time we send a badass new episode your way. Now without further ado, let's get on with the show. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Game Over, where we discuss interesting topics while playing some badass video games. My name is Ace, and I will be your host today. I'm joined by a few friends of mine. Annie, you want to say hello?
What's up?
Danger. Hey, what's going on?
And Jenku.
Hello, everyone.
Today, we have the best game of all time, Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I'm not just saying that to hype it up or anything. It was actually rated a perfect score of 10 out of 10 by all major game publications. It's a game that's very dear to my heart because it's the game that started it all for me. The one that made me look at games as more than just a mashing, platforming grind. And instead realize the depth of how sublime a game can be as an art form, with a riveting story and cast and a super addictive dynamic gameplay loop. I'm not just talking about this game specifically, by the way, guys, not the one that we're looking on the screen. I'm also talking about the original title that it's based on. As you can probably already tell from the title, this is a complete remake of the original Final Fantasy VII that was released back in January of 1997, I believe, on the PlayStation 1. Have you guys heard of it? Do you guys know of Final Fantasy?
Yeah, I played it on the PS1.
Oh, you remember? Did you play the remake?
Yeah, it's a good game. I have not played the remake yet, but I kind of want to now.
It is so awesome, man. So, you remember the old game. Do you remember how so freaking long it was, dude?
Yeah.
Dude, it was
like 3 or 4 discs.
Exactly, dude. It was so long that it actually spanned 3 whole discs before you were able to finally see the conclusion of its epic story. It was that long. Now, this isn't a form of criticism for the game. Like, this isn't like we're not talking shit about the game. It was actually a revolutionary game for its time. It was a massive success too. It earned so much money, and it kickstarted the whole genre of role-playing games. Nobody knew about those type of games, and if it weren't for Final Fantasy VII and Pokemon, I don't think RPGs would have ever left Japan. And we wouldn't have all these complicated systems with games like Call of Duty and Destiny that draw inspiration from the genre in terms of progression and stuff. But what I enjoy more about the remake, which I definitely suggest you play, especially if you're a fan, Jenku. What I enjoy more about the remake is that they grabbed a small portion of the game, the Midgar part, and flushed it out into a masterpiece of its own, giving us a much shorter adventure, but with a lot of heart and spunk in terms of the new gameplay. The reason why I personally believe that this is better is not just the crazy upgrade, not the better graphics or the adrenaline-pumping gameplay, but people spent a ridiculous portion of their lives on the original game, sometimes even ignoring their work and duties, just to grind those levels up to beat the ruby weapon or hunt down that super rare summon materia. And that brings us to today's topic. Sometimes too much of a good thing could be incredibly harmful. Increasing your natural dopamine levels beyond a certain point by consuming yourself with whatever it is that gives you the most pleasure could inherently cause many side effects, such as depression and a lack of will to live. In order to get to the root of this major catalyst towards addiction, I'm joined by a neuroscience major that will explain to us exactly what dopamine is and how it works. Jenku, you want to take over the floor?
Okay.
So explain to us what dopamine is in the first place.
Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and that basically means there's receptors in your brain that activate, and they give you the effect of the dopamine. Everyone has dopamine naturally, but certain things trigger dopamine, and that enhances their effect and makes you feel super good, right?
And by certain things, it's not just games, right? Like, we're talking about anything at all that gives you pleasure.
Yeah, anything that makes you feel good, really.
Okay.
And A lot of drugs work on dopamine, but there's a lot of things that actually aren't like focused on dopamine, but they're still addictive. Something like cocaine is mainly on your dopamine system.
Interesting. Okay, so but not all drugs target that within your system, right? Like not all drugs cause your dopamine levels to heighten as to where you feel like the dependency for it. That's not the case. I thought dopamine worked with anything that made you feel good.
It's a difficult thing because something like cannabis works on your cannabinoid receptors, but you can still be addicted to it.
So weed is not something that actually triggers that dopamine effect in your body.
I'm sure it does.
It
so
does?
It's like
Okay.
dopamine's like a system that's always fluctuating regardless, but it's not the primary mechanism of action. Dopamine receptors aren't affected that much compared to the cannabinoid receptors. But if you're talking about something like meth or cocaine, the problem with that stuff is just it activates your dopamine receptors so heavily that you can actually fry them out and actually destroy them to where you can't feel good anymore.
So it's mostly hardcore drugs that trigger that effect. It's mostly hardcore drugs that cause your dopamine levels to rise to a point where you feel like you're dependent on it. Is it as vital as air for a lot of people that depend on these drugs?
It makes you feel that way. Like if you get off the stuff and you feel like absolute garbage and you want to die, then it's pretty important to you.
I see. That brings my next question. What are the adverse effects of having too little or too much dopamine in your system, right? Because I feel like it's a balance, right? So if you take something that increases your dopamine levels, once you're off the high, your dopamine levels automatically become a lot less than normal, right? And so that's why you feel like this lack of will to live, and at some points it could even become where you have these suicidal thoughts where you can't stand living anymore without said substance or whatever ingredient that caused the dopamine levels to rise the way they did. So what are the adverse effects of dopamine fluctuating the way it is?
If you have a drug that's giving you way too much dopamine, your body stops producing it because if you're taking this stuff every day, you don't need to produce your own natural dopamine. Now, when you stop taking the drug, all of a sudden you don't have any dopamine left in your system. See, dopamine it's actually involved in your motor system. So, having too low dopamine would make it so where you can't move around very easily, and having too much dopamine, you can't stop moving. So when you have Parkinson's, your dopamine receptors are messed up and they give you L-Dopa, which increases the dopamine levels in your body just so you can either move around or like stop your trembling.
I see. I did not know that actually. So Parkinson's is mainly attributed to your dopamine level?
Yeah, it's a dopamine receptor neurodegenerative disease.
Interesting.
Whereas Alzheimer's is your acetylcholine, which is your memory, but it's not your physical.
Could taking significant amount of drugs or whatever ingredient causes your dopamine levels to rise, could that inherently affect the chances of you getting that disease or getting diseases that are based off of low dopamine levels?
Well, there's definitely one drug that will actually give you Parkinson's. This substance is called MPTP.
Dude, I can hear Annie like struggling to find a pen and paper to write it down.
Here, I'll just try to pronounce.
Is that what you're doing, Annie? Please don't do that. I don't want that on my conscience.
Is that like a research chemical?
It's like when you have a synthesis of a research chemical and then it's a byproduct, but it can contaminate your drug, and if you don't know it and you actually ingest this stuff, you will have Parkinson's.
So if you ingest it a single time, or if you're constantly taking it, that's what leads to Parkinson's?
Honestly, I think it's a single time. It's not something you're supposed to take because it's not like a drug itself. It's just a byproduct of a synthetic opioid. But if you take it once, I think you get Parkinson's.
Oof, that's horrible. Clear your search history, Annie. If you Google that, please.
Will do.
You're currently talking about when your dopamine levels are really low. But is there a chance of anything happening if your dopamine levels are high all the time? So if you're constantly taking drugs, if you're like, say, rich and you don't care, you're consuming cocaine every day by the kilos. What kind of diseases do they get?
See, I don't know how much this has to do with the cocaine toxicity itself or the dopamine effects, but it elevates your heart rate for one. Mm-hmm. So what happens to your heart is your heart muscles become hypertrophic, which starts to cause a thickening of the walls in your heart, which means it's less area for your blood to actually flow through. Your heart pumps too much, so it gets too big, basically, and it can't function properly. It's called myopathy.
Myopathy. Okay. Interesting. So is that only drug related, or is it anything that causes your dopamine levels to get exceedingly high? For example, sex, because that would just ruin my life, right? If you told me that having sex constantly could cause me to contract something like that, I mean, I did hear of stories, like recent family members actually, but I mean, they were older, like in their 50s, that died during sex. Which is, I mean, it is a hell of a way to go, but it's like, does that contribute to that disease that you just mentioned? Like, is it not just specifically sex, but anything that raises your dopamine levels up too high? Is it something that could essentially cause the same levels of toxicity that you'd attain from drugs?
It's elevating your heart rate. Sex, I think, is more of a less of a concern unless you're, I mean, if you're old and you're vulnerable, you're more likely to have a problem because you're accelerating your heart and stuff.
I mean, you're less likely to have anything that works, right? I mean, unless obviously you're taking medicine and all that, but that brings us back to the drug thing, right?
If you take like Adderall and you work out, that really messes with your heart.
See, there's one thing that I wasn't really quite addicted to, but because like when I started to work out, I was taking a pre-workout all the time. And then I stopped because I realized like it was just like fucking with my system. I didn't like how it felt. It was never a dependency, but it feels like now, especially since I've had pre-workout for pretty much the entirety of the first year that I started actually going to the gym. Every time I drink coffee now, it feels like my heart rate goes a lot higher. Like I actually have the heart monitor thing, the one that you put on your finger, and it tells me that my heart rate goes to almost 100, which is not normal at all, right? It should be about 80, I believe.
Yeah.
So constantly getting that pre-workout in with those high levels of caffeine have caused such a deterioration in my system now that every time I even have small amounts of caffeine, it amps up my heart rate a lot higher than it should. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, you can build up a sensitivity to a substance.
So that's basically your body's way of fighting the urge to ever take more of that substance, like caffeine in my case, for example.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. In your case, you're lucky because you're like moderating and stopping it, but some people don't care or don't know, so they keep going.
That's one thing about me personally that, I mean, dude, a lot of people that know me think I'm crazy, and I can't really blame them, right? But like me personally, I've never had that sense of dependency, not just for caffeine, but for anything. I don't think there's anything that I haven't tried. I've tried everything in every different shape and form. Orally, through a needle, suppository, you name it. And I've never felt the urge to ever go back to it. It's always been sort of like the spur of the moment kind of thing. You know, I'll be at a party, at a rave, at a friend's bar mitzvah, whatever, right? And we're having like a huge party and like a rager, and that's it. I take it that one time, I enjoy the moment for what it is, and then that's it. The next day, I'm on to the next. It seems that it's unnatural to be that.
Yeah.
And it's not just with that. It's also it's kind of bad too. I feel like, for example, I've always had a problem with monogamy. I can't commit to one girl, and with me, I feel like that's the only addiction, but I don't think it's really addiction when it's natural. It's like just sort of the natural inhibition within each and every one of us, right? It's a natural thing. And so I'm not quite sure if, like, with that, is sex addiction really a thing? Like, since it raises dopamine levels at such a high level, like, when can you say that it's really not good for you?
In psychiatry, addiction is usually defined as whether it's started to impact your social, work, or physical health. So if you're having so much sex that you're injuring yourself, then would be considered an addiction.
Okay.
Or if you're like unable to stay faithful or something, and you're like always messing up your relationships.
So that's okay. Disregarding the whole sex part, I feel like the reason why I have that is mostly because I'm always trying to, like, I'm ambitious, right? Like, I'm always trying to think of what the next step is going to be. I always try to look beyond the horizon. And so, like, I don't go back to whatever it is, black or cocaine or meth or any of that shit. I don't care about it because it's not leading me where I want to be, right? And I feel like that perspective, not a lot of people have, or not a lot of people are strong enough to chase it. If you're someone who's driven, if you have ambition, that's something that could potentially make you realize that you don't really need this. What you need is that. What's over the horizon, right? That's what you really need. You're right, it's mostly a psychological thing when it comes to what is addictive and whatnot. With the whole sexual thing, I think it also is, I think it contributes to me, like, not finding the perfect person. But I think that's an excuse, like all the excuses drug addicts have, like whereas they can't help it or something like that. But because I know there's no such thing as the perfect person, it's just in my mind, that's who I want, and I won't settle for anything less. I feel like that's something that I need to work on by myself. Try to maybe, like, lower my standards or consider the reality of the situation. It's just, guys, sometimes it's like, when you're with someone, especially if they're not the right person, if you have these certain standards, you're always expecting the most beautiful girl in the room to be the one that you want to always be around and the one that you want to be in your life. But it's like, after a certain point in the relationship, for me at least, it just gets to the point where, God, I wish I could just, like, choke her, Like, every time she talks, I wish I could just, like, choke her. Not in, like, the fun way, the kind of way where it's like, oh, like, where am I gonna find a shovel at this time of night? And how am I gonna make it seem less suspicious? You know what I mean? That type of way. And I've always had that, and I feel like it's maybe because of the fact that I can't deal with the same person over and over again. I can't be around them over and over again if all I'm gonna feel like is, like, they're suffocating me, or I just want to suffocate. Does that make sense? I hope I didn't come off as a psycho or anything.
No, it's okay. Like, what about your like, friends? Do you like move on friends often?
Yeah, actually. So I think that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I've traveled all my life because my dad is, like, this big businessman, so he's always been traveling. I think I spent most of my life in Dubai. But usually I'm traveling. By most of my life, I mean 8 or 9 years in Dubai. But most of my life has been traveling. So I'm always making new friends from all over the world and, learning new cultures and discovering new things. And so I feel like I haven't really been able to hold on to a lot of friends. But am I thinking too much into it, thinking that it's possibly dopamine related? It's like whenever you're with this new girl, your dopamine levels are higher than you're with the same girl that you've been with for however long you've been with?
I think what's going on with you is you love novelty. So you like new things, and that's what traveling's all about, novelty. And it's
possibly,
like, it's bad if you want to have a long-term friendship or whatever, but if you don't have to do that. Not everyone lives that way. Yeah. You're going to learn a lot, if not learn more, by experiencing new things all the time. But I think you just really like novelty. It's like not a specific drug. You just want to try and then move on to the next thing because it's novel to you. If you're doing the same thing or being with the same girl or in the same place for too long, it becomes monotonous. Some people like the security in that, but if you don't like it, then you just have to find something new.
It's the healthy thing to do, I think. And I actually wanted to ask you, do you think if I could possibly find a way to sort of control this urge, or is it even possible to control it? Is it even possible to control your dopamine levels so that you're not always headstrong into starting something new when you already have something that's really good that you don't want to lose? Like, is it possible to control that?
Well, first, you would want to know if you're taking anything that might be causing this, like some sort of medication. Because you could use medications to solve the issue, but I don't really think, because it numbs you down.
Okay.
Maybe you could take antidepressants or something, and it numbs you down, but it's beneficial. I don't think it's beneficial.
So sometimes taking the right type of drugs is actually good for you, or at least temporarily good for you, just as to where you reach that fine point, and then that's it. You don't need those drugs anymore. That's it. You establish that balance. You can control it now. You think that is something that you've seen? Like, have you seen cases of people? Because I believe my own mother actually dealt with that for some time, where she was depressed. It had nothing to do with my situation. Like, her situation was that she was depressed all the time, so she was taking those antidepressants, because she's the exact opposite of me when it comes to leaving her hometown and traveling all the time. She really loves her old friends. So for her, she was depressed a lot of the time, and so whenever she took those drugs, it would calm her down, but she never had that dependency whereas she's still using it to this day. You know, she took it and it calmed her down, and it caused her to control it by herself as opposed to having to use the drugs over and over again.
Yeah, that's good, but I've seen a lot of bad cases when it comes to the psychiatric meds where people, I mean, I just want to bring up, so if you take antipsychotics, with this like recent research, we now know that it shrinks your brain.
It shrinks your brain? Oh shit.
It literally shrinks your brain.
Is that real? Like, is that authenticated research, or is it just like a conspiracy?
Yeah, it's recent.
Really?
Because Seroquel, like, you can look it up. They've been using this for like 60 years for various types of antipsychotics, and then recently, like within the last few years, they gave it to Macau, like monkeys or whatever, and the dependent control group, that stuff. They killed the monkeys after a few months and dissected the brain, and the cortex, like the personality center of your brain, was actually shrunk. And then they figured this out in humans. It reduces your white matter, and it's just like, it kind of makes you retarded, honestly, and that's what's scary about it. I know this one guy, I'm not going to say his name, but he's like a train hopper. He's always like, he lives homeless because he wants to be homeless, and he just wants to be a bum and do drugs in the streets. When he takes antipsychotics, it lasts, because they injected it with him like once, it lasts like a month, and he's like chill. He's just chilling at home. He doesn't want to roam the streets, but it wears off, and then he's gone. Like, it's good in the cases where you need someone to stop being crazy, but taking the antipsychotic, if it's working, it's mainly working just because it's making you into like a zombie, to where you're just if you can hallucinate and then you take it. It's not that you're not hallucinating anymore. I mean, you might not be, but you're just like totally zoned out, to where even if you are, it doesn't matter because you're not bothering anyone.
So does that work for all antidepressants? And is it specific types of doses, or is it all doses?
Well, in this shrinkage case, I'm talking about antipsychotics, but antidepressants, it's different, and there's a lot of different kinds of, like SSRI and different kinds of variants on that. The dosages I'm not that familiar with, and it also depends on your body, because some people respond really well to antidepressants, but I wouldn't say it's a majority. I think when they were doing the clinical trials, when they got, like in the 90s, when this stuff first came out, it was only marginally more effective than taking an actual sugar pill, which is a placebo effect.
Wow, no, I definitely feel bad. Annie, I apologize for calling you a dummy the other day. when you made me mad. I didn't know. I had no idea. I had no idea this was happening.
No biggie.
So
you should check out ketamine for depression, though.
wait, ketamine, isn't that the horse thing?
Horse tranquilizer.
Horse tranquilizer?
Yeah.
Yep.
Dude, why? Why would you recommend that? Why would
Because you take it like...
Disassociative.
Yeah, it's actually this new, really emergency like therapy coming out in the last few years. You take it like once a week, or like maybe just once like a couple times a year. You get like a visionary experience to where you rethink your life from a like outside your body's perspective, and you can analyze your problems.
An out of body
like,
experience?
Yeah, like you analyze your problems from a different point of view.
I think, well, I've lived in California at some point, and there was one girl that I was going out with that did that shit all the time, and she made me not curious at all about it, because every time I would go just chill with her, her eyes would be just almost as if they're coming out of her skull, and she would just seem so weird. I mean, she was doing stuff that I've never saw anyone that did the kind of stuff that she did, but it's just freaky, man. Like, some of this stuff makes you freaky. There was another drug that I heard it was more dangerous that gave me personally an out-of-body experience. The only time I think I've ever had an out-of-body experience. Which didn't last at all, because, like, dude, I was with some sketchy-ass people at that time, so I didn't get to enjoy it that much. But I forgot what it was called. It's like a couple of letters. It's like 3 letters. It's like DMT, DHT, I think something like that.
DXM, DMT.
DMT, there we go. Yeah, DMT. That's the one. Do you know anything about it? Like, is it... Because I don't know. I did, some dude was just like, dude, you should try this shit. It's fire. I'm like, okay. That's all I know. That's as much as I know about it. I didn't realize that... it almost felt as if like, my spirit or my soul crawled out of my body, and it was playing... It held like a controller and was controlling my body at that point. I felt like I was in a video game or something.
That pretty much sums it up, dude.
That sums it up, huh?
Yeah, I mean, DMT is I was just going to say that it's a thing that people make. You can synthesize it in your home pretty easy and reasonably safely. Yeah, DMT is a thing. I think it's the same as ayahuasca, right?
It's slightly the same.
It's the same family.
Ayahuasca's like oral DMT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In regards to it surging my dopamine levels to the point where I'm hallucinating this stuff, is that what had happened? Like, is that the reason why it's so strong? Could certain drugs give you this heavy surge as compared to other drugs?
Well, yeah, certain drugs do activate dopamine much more, but when it comes to DMT, I'm gonna look at so there's something that's called a receptor affinity, which says like how much it affects each receptor. Now, DMT does activate the dopamine receptors as well as the psychedelic serotonin receptors and your adrenal receptors, and quite a bit of serotonin, mainly in dopamine. Now, DMT is actually really special because it's one of the few drugs that is able to, like, basically, it doesn't matter who you are, it basically will cause you to have like some sort of mystical experience, and it's completely natural in your body all the time. So when you smoke it or whatever, you just like bring way more in, and then but it's also supposedly released upon death, and DMT is like in your lung tissue, it's in a lot of your organs, and I think it's been proven that it's released in surges when people like have a cardiac arrest or whatever. So it explains a lot of near-death experiences, and it's implicated in your dreams as well. But when it comes to like having these crazy psychedelic effects, it's like more of a spectrum. It's not just like your dopamine only, but it's all this other serotonin stuff that causes it.
Because I heard of dopamine also causing you to hallucinate. Having high levels of dopamine, I'm assuming it's not just from drugs, it could be from anything that causes your dopamine levels to surge. That could potentially cause you to hallucinate, or what's going on there?
Yeah, pretty sure it could. Like, for example, if you're taking cocaine or whatever, something that really messes with your dopamine, you're gonna start like potentially hearing voices or thinking, like hallucinating, like paranoia, something's going on that's not actually happening.
So you're imagining it. It's not really, for example, coming to life. It's just something that's within your mind, right? It's not like you're, as you said, you're paranoid, you think that something's happening, but it's not actually happening. You don't see
It depends though. Like if you've been staying up for multiple days in a row on cocaine or meth, you will see things and you will actually like have things. You'll be talking to people who aren't there.
Really?
Like very real experiences. But this also happens if you take Benadryl. And Benadryl is like it messes with your acetylcholine receptors. It's not even like a dopamine specific thing, but it's called a delirium, and that basically guarantees you to have like what they call true hallucinations. Like a hallucination is usually like it's a hallucination, but a true hallucination is like you could not distinguish it from reality.
I have friends that have been, you call it like stuck, where they can't differentiate reality from like the trip, like even after they're done tripping off of like LSD and DMT.
Dude, it goes far beyond anything that I've experienced. I mean, as far as what I've been through, like the highest hallucination were like when, these LED lights suddenly transformed into a dragon and just like flew around me. That was it, but it was never something where it's like you're living inside this dream, because that's what it feels like, right? What you guys are talking about, it almost feels like the movie Inception. It's like what's real and what's not.
Not so much a dream, just sometimes I guess you can tell when things aren't supposed to be there. One of my friends who's like permanently stuck from doing acid for a week straight, she sees, instead of seeing faces, she'll see scribbles, like moving scribbles over people's faces, and she has to do like a double take or like slap herself so she can see the actual person and not the moving scribbles.
So it permanently damaged her brain, like she can never recover from this?
It's been a couple years, but I know that there are people that do need like babysit or caretakers for like the rest of their life because they go so ham with it that they can't ever come back to reality.
Yo, thank God I don't have an addictive personality. This is crazy. Wow.
I don't know that that's an addiction thing to just want to continue to be up. I mean, it takes a lot of LSD to really get to that point.
Yeah.
I guess my point is everybody I know that has damaged themselves with LSD was already in a pretty jacked up situation where they were dealing a quantity outside of their mental capacity to handle dealing.
So you gotta admit, I like to have fun as much as the next person. And I'm sure you do, Annie does, Jenku, you as well. But you gotta admit that the key word is moderation. You don't want to end up like your friend to start hallucinating or going to a certain point of no return where you completely damage your brain and you just can't recover from it anymore. You don't want to ever get to that. And the beautiful thing about our body is that the body can heal. Our bodies are constantly regenerating. If we, in moderation, enjoy some of these drugs or food or sex or whatever it is that causes our dopamine levels to be the way they are, if we enjoy them in moderation, it won't harm you. And even if it did harm you for a certain amount of time, you're able to recover from it so that you can do it again and still live a healthy lifestyle. That's the thing. Like, I respect what you do, Danger, in terms of working out and finding something else to do, or fasting the day before, finding something to occupy your mind.
Well, I don't know. I guess the long and short of what I would say is about hallucinogens is that they take practice. And I think people need to have, going into a situation, you don't learn how to even practice until you get far enough into the world that you can take just one. Like, sometimes it's nice to just have one hit of acid and just play around and experience just having one, and not 7. But 7's super fun, but like it takes time. It takes years of playing with this stuff to kind of get to a point where they're just a tool to magnify getting the most out of every minute of this brief little life we got. That's it. So practice and be careful and grow your own mushrooms for sure. Always grow your own mushrooms. Fuck buying mushrooms.
What about
never buy mushrooms.
What the kids are doing these days? Those candy flips or whatever. You know, it's like you don't take 7 drops of acid, but you mix acid with Molly, for example, or MDMA. Like, is that better in your opinion, or is it just as bad as 7 drops of acid?
I think that if I were young and starting out, I would seek out a group of friends that had access between them all to have the reagents to test everything that you fuck around with. The Fenty is the big problem right now. And so, have a reagent kit, test for Fenty, party on, Garth. But unfortunately, when you're young, you never have a good hookup. You never have reasonable places to get anything. I know I didn't when I was young and stupid. So, yeah, I think it's cheap to be able to test at home for Fenty. So I think everybody should.
What about
you? Are there people even addicted to fentanyl?
Yeah, and I think it stops their heart. I think it kills people pretty bad.
Yeah,
that's a pretty hard one to fuck with.
Puts you right to sleep, like into anesthesia, just like ketamine.
Yeah, I'm not an opiate guy. I don't like them. I was on them for long term for a brief little bit, and I stay away from them.
So, Jenku, what about you? I want to ask you the same question. If you're mixing drugs as opposed to doing the same drug over and over again, from a scientific or a medical perspective, is that a catalyst for causing brain damage? Does that make it worse?
Quite honestly, yeah. There's some things like weed. You can combine weed with any psychedelic, really. It's not an issue, really, so we know of. But now, combining Molly and acid, that's pretty common.
Yeah.
I have personal experience with that. Now, if you're doing it like once just to see what it's like, I don't think it's going to do anything wrong with you. But Molly on itself actually causes brain damage. So now they recently...
MDMA?
Yeah.
I thought MDMA was
the
least harmless, so it just makes you horny or something.
It's not too dangerous compared to something else, but it's still not harmless. See, the thing is with LSD and mushrooms, they don't actually damage your brain at all, which is probably a surprise to a lot of people. But unfortunately, Molly does, and even though it's been approved for PTSD therapy recently, it's only for like emergency use because the creator of this stuff, like Rick Doblin, not the creator of the drug, but just like the therapy, he acknowledges that it causes brain damage to a degree. And if you're combining drugs, basically, you have an effect, like, drugs are pretty unpredictable on their own. But you have one drug that does this, and you have another drug that does this. It's not just that they combine, okay, now they both do that. But it's like a fusion to where now like a bunch of other stuff happens that no one could have possibly predicted would happen. And that's where it gets into the dangerous. That's the mystery aspect. Now if you have 2 stimulants, that causes excitotoxicity in your brain. Like combining coffee with Adderall is probably a little iffy. If you combine Adderall with cocaine, that's really bad for your brain. It will mess you up. It will mess up your heart and stuff. Now, if you do it once, you're going to feel whatever after it wears off, but it still affects you, and your body will regenerate. But that's a type of thing, if you're combining them habitually, you're going to get screwed over much faster. And if you combine, like, a depressant, like alcohol, Xanax, an opioid, whatever, with a stimulant, that messes up your body chemistry, too, because your stimulant's making your heart race, and then the other thing is slowing your depressant, is slowing your heart down, and your body's just like, what the hell is going on? And it starts glitching out, basically. That can kill you. One drug won't kill you, the other drug won't kill you. Combine both of them, and you actually could die.
So it becomes toxic at that point if you combine certain formulas together, I guess. Yeah.
if you're gonna combine anything, there's lots of resources online. They have like this picture, like these spreadsheets. It lists X, Y axis. You can go to this drug and scroll down. You find the other drug. You see, is it safe to combine? You can combine most psychedelics. It's not an issue. It's when you get into the other like pharmaceuticals, it's not a good idea.
Interesting. What about you, Annie? You obviously have a lot more experience with this stuff than I do. How do you fight the temptation? How do you function with your life? Because, you know, you're fairly successful, you're athletic. How are you able to keep it from ruining your life?
I wouldn't go so far as to say I have a perfect life with my use. It's definitely a struggle to stay away, but you know, once it stops hitting and I'm at a ridiculous amount that I need to start taking just to feel like what I was feeling before the very first time, that's when I realized like I do need tolerance break. And luckily for me, I do have the will to stop when I need to. Absolutely need to. Sometimes I'll let it go a little too far, but I wouldn't say I'm like permanently addicted to anything right now.
Right now, but you've had to fight addiction before?
Yeah, I mean, just going completely brain dead and not having to worry about like your troubles in the world, not have a care in the world is so awesome. You know, who'd rather do that than, you know, sit on the sofa and sort it out? I choose the easy way out.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people do, right? Especially if they have the resources to do it. That's what we were talking about earlier, which is having the highest level of dopamines possible, and having that all the time is still bad for you, and it could mess with your head. So the key word here for you was your willpower to stop. But do you think that it was also because of the friends that you had at the time? Did they help you or motivate you to stay away from this stuff? Or was it like the opposite? Was it them always trying to get you to do it?
No, it's pretty much me just solo. I mean, I found this stuff on my own, and if people don't want to partake, I won't force them to partake. So I'd say I'm the one that got myself in trouble, just experimenting left and right.
Yeah, we've all been there, trust me. It was just your willpower that prevailed in you. Was it ever something that perhaps drove you down a different road? Like, was it exercising? Was it your job? You know, doing something that you actually love to do? Did that take you out of that experimenting phase or that bubble, whereas you're just always trying to get high and...
Something that took me out of it?
Yeah. So as in like something that you feel like is more important than drugs. It made you feel better or happier than drugs.
I definitely have to say family, because they start talking about stuff like this trip that we have upcoming, and they're talking about like old stories and stuff that we did and places we went, and I'm like, wait, what? That happened? Like, I should have been there for that. And, you know, missing out on those memories, that's kind of been like my stopper right there. I want to be involved more with my family. I don't want to be the dumb one like, wait, you guys did what? I was there, huh? I look like a total dumbass in front of them. Just missing out on like sentimental time.
That's actually really funny. So I'm not the only one that calls you a dummy now. Nice.
And not the first.
So it's actually, I was right, it's friends and family, well, in your case. You know, they helped you realize that there's more to life than just, you know, drugs or the harmful things that we do to ourselves sometimes, thinking that we have no other option and life is without color or without meaning without it. I think I'd already mentioned it, but for me personally, I was like you in the sense that it was always a solo thing, you know, and I never said no to anything. I just kept hopping and trying everything that I could, and I found myself in like really bad places. Remember I told you I was living in a hood with gangsters and shit? And so,
yep.
Yeah, the entire block that I lived in at that point were drug dealers. And so I was with the actual suppliers of this. So like I always had like shipments coming in and just like walk in. put that shit on the table. We'd snort a few lines, play some video games before they actually head out. Like, that was the morning routine. You know, I was the guy they came to play some PlayStation before they go and start selling the drugs. So I was in like the forefront of the canon of all this crazy shit. But yeah, I never felt the urge to actually go and say like, hey, give me some of this shit. Or I wasn't like scratching myself or doing all that. The reason I feel is mainly because I was very active during that. So after I'm done with it, I just go out and see what I have to do for the rest of the day, you know, whether it's work or go to the gym. Just like always kept myself busy. And I think that's what a lot of people, especially drug addicts, what they don't have in their lives. They're always under the impression that they need it because there's nothing else going on. And that life doesn't matter anyway. I didn't ask to be born. Like, that's one thing I hear a lot from a lot of these drug addicts. It's like, I didn't ask to be born, you know, and this is the only thing that makes me feel good, so leave me alone. There's more to it. You just like haven't really opened that door. You haven't discovered the world. You're always in that bubble of yours, and so now you're suffering because of it, and it could eventually end your life a lot sooner than you would expect. Again, guys, I think the key lesson here would be that moderation is key. Not only does it give you a kick, but it also allows you to enjoy other things with life. Allows you to realize that, you know, there's a lot more going on than just that substance that you're taking. You could actually get high off of life, and that expression is there for a reason. Life is beautiful. It's just you have to actually get to know it. You have to go out there and discover it for yourself.
Shall we one day return? By her loving grace and providence, may we take our place in paradise.